It's my pleasure to welcome you to John Carroll University this evening. I see so many faces of people I know, students, faculty colleagues, and people who have been here before, as well as people who I am seeing for the very first time. To you especially, a very, very warm welcome to our campus, and we hope to see you again and again. Those of you here for the very first time, you will find information about other programs at jcu.edu. We have a whole panoply of programs, incidentally, for March and April and May. So do come back, please. Let me say a word about the plan for this evening. We have two speakers. Father Niehoff will be speaking first. We will take a stretch break, and Father O'Malley will be speaking second. I do have to tell you that Father O'Malley is currently in the air, about to arrive at the Cleveland airport, or still in the air, and we'll see when he does arrive. But anyway, he will be our second speaker. And after the two speakers, they will sit here and they will engage in a conversation with all of you, as well as a question and answer period. After that, we will adjourn to the atrium for a reception. So that's the plan of the evening. Tonight, we are commemorating the election of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who was elected Pope a year and a day ago on March 13th. It's been quite a year for the Catholic Church, for the world, and we are spending the year becoming acquainted with our new Pope, Pope Francis. Father Robert Niehoff, the president of John Carroll University and our first speaker this evening, shares a unique connection with Pope Francis. Both, as Jesuits, have served the Church as administrators for most of their lives. Yes, of course, the context and responsibilities have been different for each of them. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, for example, was a master of novices, a very responsible position in the Society of Jesus, superior of the Jesuit community, a provincial of Jesuits in Argentina, the Cardinal of Buenos Aires, and now he is Pope and Bishop of Rome. As it happens, Father Niehoff has his own impressive list of administrative credentials. At one time, like the Pope, he was superior of a Jesuit community. But then the trajectory changed. He became, and I'm not doing these in precise chronological order, and I am also not telling you all of them, but after being a superior of the Jesuit community, he was treasurer of the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, chief financial officer of the Archdiocese of Nassau in the Bahamas, an executive member of the Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities, and he has served on the boards of Georgetown University, St. Louis University, Regis University, and now he is president of John Carroll University, a very heavy-duty administrative job. He is our CEO, in a manner of speaking. Administrators are problem solvers who often need help sorting out the difficulties they face every day, be they with university finances, recruitment, diversity, personnel, or with the Vatican Bank, or the Roman Curia, or the selection of new cardinals. We have learned, thanks to journalists who leave no stone unturned, and thanks to the Pope, who is available to answer many of their questions, that the go-to person for the Pope when he needs help as an administrator is to turn to Mary, the mother of Jesus, pictured behind me, pictured as Mary, the untier of knots. She unties knots. The Pope first saw this painting in Augsburg, Germany. He latched onto it and brought a replica back to Argentina, where devotion to Mary, untier of knots, has grown. I don't know if Father Niehoff shares the Pope's affection for Mary, untier of knots, but I do know that the issues that both men face is inextricably linked to seeing that the most vulnerable are factored into solutions, that the most vulnerable are accounted for. We've grown accustomed, haven't we, to this angle of vision from the Pope, who not only talks the talk, but consistently walks the walk with the marginalized. But at John Carroll, we have a president who shares the same commitment for the underprivileged, and it is a long-standing commitment. It just didn't start with the new Pope. Way back when, Father Niehoff, as a young Jesuit, tutored inmates at Cook County Jail in Chicago and served the disenfranchised in the Philippines during his formative years as a Jesuit. That same commitment to justice guides policy here at John Carroll University, where Father Niehoff, and I say this from personal experience, as do the students here in the first two rows, because he is involved in a water project that these students are involved in. That same commitment guides policy at John Carroll University, where Father Niehoff vigorously supports every project that ensures justice for those to whom justice has been denied or has been inefficiently meted out. That commitment notwithstanding, and it is a strong commitment, both the Pope and Father Niehoff are fully aware that they never do quite enough and that there is always more to be done. Tonight you will hear Father Niehoff provide an insider's insight into the life of a brother Jesuit. Sit back, relax, and please welcome John Carroll's president, Robert Niehoff of the Society of Jesus.
Very nice, Doris. Thank you. When you're dealing with Doris, you almost never know what all is going to happen. I've never heard an introduction like that. And as they joke many times, I was impressed. My mother might have believed it. I'm intrigued by this. Let me welcome all of you. I was going to welcome our speakers, but none of them are here. Okay? Except me. There are Jesuits in this room who were students of John O'Malley's. This is my one and only opportunity to be the lead-in for John O'Malley, and he's not even here. So my thanks to many people who helped to prepare for this weekend's events. In particular, thanks to Doris for all of her efforts. And I welcome all of you and look forward to our time together and what we're going to hear. I suspect you're going to hear from me things you haven't heard from others, and that's my goal. I could have been a novice under this man as a novice master. So let me begin. The title of my talk is the 1970s Jesuit Provincial, Father Bergoglio's Challenges, Struggle, Pain and Grace, Personal and Communal. As soon as the name of the new Pope was announced, phones began to ring and the internet buzzed with emails. The only Jesuit cardinal elector at the conclave was Pope. Everyone asked, who was this man and what was he like? There was great enthusiasm following the election of Pope Francis, a Jesuit Pope. Jesuits and our alums were very excited, and the news spread. Many of our alums wanted to remind me of my prediction that there was zero chance that a Jesuit would be elected. So with that track record, here you go. Today, everyone still wants to talk about Pope Francis, and most positively rave about him. Even members of Cleveland's Jewish community want to talk about Pope Francis. Listening to the way people talk, you might think that Pope Francis has changed things. I will leave the discussion of how much change has or will take place to others, but what has changed is the way people talk about the Pope, and I might add, the hope they have in him. In an interview with two journalists in 2010, Archbishop Bergoglio described his years as Jesuit provincial in this way. I don't want to mislead anyone. The truth is, I am a sinner who God in his mercy has chosen to love in a privileged manner. From a young age, life pushed me into leadership roles. As soon as I was ordained a priest, I was designated as Master of Novices, and 2.5 years later, leader of the province. And I had to learn from my errors along the way. Because, to tell the truth, I made hundreds of them, errors and sins. It would be wrong for me to say that these days I ask for forgiveness for the sins and offenses that I might have committed. Today, I ask forgiveness for the sins and offenses that I did indeed commit. I am convinced that Pope Francis does not speak of his own sins and errors theoretically or casually, but with a sense of regret, which I believe includes, may even focus on, his time as Jesuit provincial. I will be speaking tonight about some of those events which I think Pope Francis now wishes could have been different. Tonight I will use a number of stories from Paul Vallalli's very finely researched biography entitled Pope Francis, Untying the Knot. In his book, Vallally addresses very complicated questions of George Bergoglio's life. After reading Untying the Knots, we're left with the story of a man's actions and a little more knowledge of a man who in his early days seems quite different from the Pope Francis we now see. I will try to put these stories and concerns in a Jesuit context, reflecting with you tonight about my experiences in the Society of Jesus in the 70s when he was provincial. My question from a year ago continues. How did George Bergoglio, how did his experience as provincial lead to the Pope Francis we now see? I think through struggle, pain, and grace, personal and communal. So let's begin with one of the first Jesuits to comment on George Bergoglio following his election. Vallally writes, quote, "One of the most senior Jesuit figures in the Society of Jesus, a serving provincial in another Latin American country, wrote this, quote, 'Yes, I know Bergoglio. He's a person who caused a lot of problems in the society and is highly controversial even in his own country. In addition to being accused of having allowed the arrest of 2 Jesuits during the time of Argentine dictatorship, as provincial, he generated divided loyalties Some groups almost worshiped him, while others would have nothing to do with him, and he would hardly speak to them. It was an absurd situation. End quote. Those early Jesuit responses to his election were frankly muted. We began to see why, with references in the press to Cardinal Bergoglio's mid-70s time as Jesuit provincial in Argentina, which included a period of military rule when human rights abuses were prevalent and many people were taken. Now, all of you familiar with that history in Latin America, taken basically means kidnapped with no process. And many of those disappeared. They were never heard from again. Father Michael Campbell Johnson of the Society of Jesus suggests that there were 6,000 political prisoners and 20,000 disappeared during the Dirty War, 1973 to 1983 in Argentina. The story of one group, called the Mothers of the Disappeared, is told in Vallalli's book. As Cardinal Archbishop, Bergoglio never agreed to their requests that he meet with them, though they gathered each day for years in the town square in front of the presidential palace and the cathedral. After his election as Pope, he did have a brief meeting with their leaders, but has not yet responded to their requests that he open the Archdiocesan archives to assist them in finding information about their children and grandchildren who disappeared in the Dirty War. Then the questions got even more serious. Stories began to come out about the two Jesuits who had been kidnapped, some say arrested. The main question was, had Bergoglio done enough to assist them? Or an even more serious concern, had Bergoglio been complicit in their incarceration? The issues around the kidnapping are complicated, and I don't have time to share all those facts and assertions that are available. I'll take just a couple minutes and share some of the highlights, as this, I think, is a very significant part of Bergoglio's history. I believe this story might be the key to the transformation of Father Bergoglio and his commitment to justice. Vallalli spends about half his book talking about the kidnapping of the two Jesuits. The prior provincial, Father Ricardo O'Farrell, had given 4 priests permission to start a community alongside a shanty town, which some city council bureaucrat had named Slum 1.11.14. During the week, they would continue their work as university lecturers, but on weekends, they would minister to the neglected people of the slum next door. O'Farrell is described as an advocate for change and had encouraged Jesuits, Vallalli notes, like Fathers Orlando Yario and Franz Jolix, quote, to work with the poor in the slums from which they would be kidnapped by the military in an incident which has cast a shadow over George Mario Bergoglio's ministry ever since. It is important to note that Father O'Farrell did not complete his normal 6-year term as provincial. Now, one of the reasons I rely upon Vallalli is many of these stories are told other places, but they aren't documented at all anywhere else that I know. So, trusting in the fine research that was done, this is the story Vallalli tells. Vallalli states that Bergoglio's appointment as provincial was in response to concerns and an attempt to change the direction of the province. Father Arupe, the general, acceded to the request of those who wanted O'Farrell removed. Vallely notes, O'Farrell had been a modernizing influence. Bergoglio put an end to that. Vallely seems to suggest that the unrest in the province led to Bergoglio's appointment, which clearly did not resolve the divisions. Things got more serious. Among those with whom they worked in the slums were activists of the Peronismo de Base movement, a group with Marxist leanings working among the underprivileged. This was precisely the kind of activity from which Bergoglio, when he became provincial in 1973, was determined that Jesuits should end their association. It is suggested that Bergoglio's concerns were both to keep these men and other Jesuits from being targeted by men of violence, and his opposition to liberation theology within the order. To quote Vallely's summary, using the scriptures to politicize and empower the poor, he felt, was giving scandal to conservative Catholics who saw the preferential option for the poor as subversive and degrading to traditional Ignatian spirituality. He told the priests to give up their work in the slums. Bergoglio asked and then commanded that Yario and Jalix leave the slums, and they refused. Eventually, Bergoglio asked Father Arupe to dismiss Yario and Jalix from the society, and then asked the Archbishop of Buenos Aires to remove their faculties to function as priests in the archdiocese. Many assert that the removal of their priestly faculties made them a target for the right-wing militants and suggested that they were fair game. Vallely notes, Yario and Jalix were now in a kind of limbo. Their Rivadavia community had been dissolved, but they continued to live in the area without any official Jesuit status. At this point, Vallely also recounts the story told to him by a human rights lawyer, Alicia Oliveira, of a catechist who worked in the same slum as the Jesuits. Quote, I gave her the same advice Bergoglio gave his priests. I told her to leave. Eventually she listened, and she and her husband left. But Yario and Jalix did not, and we know what happened to them. Other Jesuits left the slums too. The kidnapping took place at 11 a.m. Sunday, May 23, 1976, the day before Yario had telephoned Bergoglio and asked him what they should do about the usual Sunday Mass. Bergoglio told them they could say Mass privately at their homes and sent another priest to say Mass at the church. I won't get into Bergoglio's meetings and activities to seek their freedom, and it might have even kept them alive. Vallely tells of some of these activities, but adds that not everyone agrees that enough was done. He notes that various accounts are given as to why they were released and not murdered, like most of the disappeared. Bergoglio's friends insist it was his intervention which was decisive. Not all agree with that assessment. In 1996, Father Kolvenbach, then Jesuit general, offered Yario acceptance back into the Society of Jesus. Quote, Yario said he would accept it only if given access to all the documentation in which Bergoglio, by then auxiliary bishop, filed charges against him. Kolvenbach replied that this could not be done, end quote. Yario died in 2000, it's thought due to the medical complications resulting from his trauma. Jalix has remained at the German retreat house to which he fled soon after his release. Not long thereafter, Bergoglio becomes Archbishop of Buenos Aires, and his actions as Archbishop are quite different from his decisions as provincial. Vallely includes this telling story. In 1974, one of the first slum priests in Buenos Aires, was murdered. In 1999, when his remains were transferred to his boyhood parish, Archbishop Bergoglio noted during the ceremony that he had prayed for Father Majuca and all those involved in his death. And this is quote, "For his actual killers, for those who were the ideologues of his death, for the complicit silence of most of society, and for the times that, as members of the church, we did not have the courage to denounce his assassination. Lord, have mercy." End quote. Yario and Jalix and the other Jesuits whom Bergoglio once ordered out of the slums for saying such things would have been astonished to hear that. 40 years on, the same man would not just be tolerating such sentiments, but endorsing and blessing them. After he became Archbishop of Buenos Aires, the number of priests working in the slums in the vast city had quadrupled. Jalix was still in Germany when Bergoglio was elected. They met some years earlier at the retreat house in Germany where Jalix fled after his release. Jalix stated in a press release after Bergoglio's election that the two men had reconciled and had celebrated Mass together and had ended with what Jalix called a solemn embrace. What actually happened, an eyewitness said, was that the two men fell into each other's arms and wept. I see struggle, pain, and grace here, personal and communal. Argentina certainly experienced some special challenges, but the Jesuits were in transition during those years. The story Vallely relates does not seem to adequately convey the tensions and the challenges within the Society of Jesus in the 1970s. Like the Church after Vatican II, the order was in transition, and there were tensions, I suspect, in every province. In an effort to put Father Bergoglio's time as provincial in a broader context of what Jesuits were experiencing at the time, I will share some of my own reflections on my experience. I entered the Oregon province in 1972 after spending my high school years as a student at the Jesuit High School in Tacoma, Washington. During those years, I observed many Jesuits, from the ancient to the newly ordained, and the 10 or so young Jesuits in training doing their teaching assignment prior to theology, a time Jesuits call Regency. So what was the Society of Jesus like when Father Bergoglio was provincial? I was thinking of my 3 provincials during that time. A man who left the society not long thereafter, a man who had a breakdown, and a man who was very pleasant but old enough that we never thought he really got any of the concerns we shared. But he was good. That helped. The Society of Jesus was addressing the post-Vatican II changes in the Church and its implication for Jesuits and their institutions. We know the tensions in the Church between the theological camps following Vatican II. The Jesuits also had similar divisions between traditionalists and those who wanted or demanded changes in structure and style in the order and in the Church. Father General Pedro Urrupe had crafted the now almost historic term "men for others" in a talk to Jesuit school alumni, mostly European, and at that time almost universally male, at their international conference in 1973. This was, by coincidence, the day on which Father George Bergoglio became provincial of Argentina, the feast of St. Ignatius, July 31, 1973. I was a second-year novice. The new focus on justice and service created new hope and promise for many, but it created tensions felt most keenly in those early years between those Jesuits working, it's hard to imagine now, within educational institutions and those Jesuits with more direct spiritual ministry and pastoral focus. The same, Vallely says, was happening in Argentina. The following year, 1974, Father Arrupe convened this 32nd General Congregation. Bergoglio, as provincial, was an elector, and it was thought not happy with the outcome. Vallely states, the Superior General wanted the order's highest body to address the questions of how the Jesuits were putting into practice the vision of the Second Vatican Council. On the agenda was the mission of the Jesuits, quote, from the congregation, to engage under the standard of the cross in the crucial struggle of our time, the struggle for faith, and that struggle for justice, which it includes. GC 32, Decree 4, our mission today, the service of faith and the promotion of justice, made a bold call to Jesuits for the commitment to justice. As an aside, during those years, you would hear from all kinds of folks within the society, we need to do this, Decree 4 says we need to do this. Well, Decree 4, and on the minds of some, said we need to move out of our educational institutions and we need to get out on the streets. So this 32nd General Congregation, to quote just 3 lines, the mission of the Society of Jesus today is the service of faith, of which the promotion of justice is an absolute requirement. For the reconciliation with God demands the reconciliation of people with one another. We are confronted today, in fact, by a whole new series of challenges. There's a new challenge to our apostolic mission in a world increasingly interdependent, but for all that, divided by injustice. Injustice not only personal, but institutionalized, built into economic, social, and political structures that dominate the life of nations and the international community. Our response to these new challenges will be unavailing unless it is total, corporate, rooted in faith and experience. We need our whole persons, our communities, our institutions, our ministries, our resources to address this challenge. The congregation was divided on this document, and the vote on it was left to the last day, and it passed, but not with a supermajority. One delegate told me that he had no appreciation for the significance of Decree 4 at that time. It just was not that clear, he said. To help appreciate the depth of the tensions that GC 32 created, it's worth noting it took 20 years before GC 34 authored a restatement of the challenge, Decree 2, our mission today, and justice. Finally, a more unified Jesuit commitment to justice with a commitment to faith. Faith and justice now more integrated both in the documents and a criterion for evaluating all Jesuit ministries. George Traub, a Jesuit at Xavier University, summarizes the accomplishments of GC 34 very well. GC 34, he says, recalled that for GC 32, the promotion of justice included, quote, working for structural change in the economic and political orders, working for peace and reconciliation through nonviolence, working to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, ethnic background, or social class, working to counter growing poverty and hunger while material prosperity becomes even more concentrated. It seems that Pope Francis' encyclical speaks directly to those issues. Now place in that mix the social and political fractures within our national politics. In my experience, in the case of Argentina, add the nationalist, socialist, and alleged Marxist political factions and the economic challenges to all those challenges in the church. Liberal and conservative positions were evident regarding these issues and often created camps within our Jesuit communities. Issues like Vatican II's ecclesiology, the Vietnam War, private devotion, theology, social change, politics, generational issues, declining vocations, and clerical dress, the source of often very bitter debates in some of our communities. It's good that that's old. And Argentina faced additional divisions regarding the Jesuit response to liberation theology, Marxism, extreme poverty, socialism, nationalism, social justice, and military rule. During Bergoglio's time as provincial, Argentina and the U.S. experienced dramatic declines in Jesuit vocations. In Argentina, novice vocations declined from 25 in 1963 to 2 novices during his time, with 15 Jesuits leaving the province every year. Declining vocations raise questions about our future. For a province of less than 200 in Argentina, departures, almost 10% of that, were keenly felt. Other than knowing Cardinal Bergoglio was a member of the conclave, I knew little or nothing about the Jesuits in Argentina or their history. My hope following his election was that he could show the church a way in freedom. We have found ourselves as a church in a series of knots. What might we have done to address the challenges Father Bergoglio faced? I have no clue. But the ability to see alternative ways of responding to our challenges is a sign of freedom and an opportunity for grace. The Society of Jesus grew through those challenging post-Vatican II years, and we are freer. One sign of that freedom is the space within our provinces to discern together where God is calling us individually and communally. Not all will agree in each case and each decision, and we're more comfortable now that they don't need to. We trust more, or maybe it's just that I trust more than I could when I was young. But I think that the shared history of the society has led us to a place where we are less divided and more confident in our communal choices. Pope Francis may well help us all move forward while he takes the church forward. And how blessed is that? I did not expect his freedom. I never imagined the impact his change in style would have. I, like many of you, am so delighted the red shoes are gone. We get to the essentials. And I'm amazed at his humanness. The gift of the spiritual exercises, St. Ignatius' program of spiritual formation and discernment, patterned on his own spiritual journey, is the task of finding freedom in the will of God and a willingness to serve Jesus Christ wherever the Spirit may call us. Pope Francis' freedom and simplicity has surprised us all. It has inspired me and even non-Catholics. It seems that everyone is talking about him and everyone is excited by the early signs. But just like Argentina, not everyone in the church is pleased by his freedom. It is not clear to me how Father Bergoglio would see Pope Francis. And John O'Malley just arrived. How that freedom grew over the years, we cannot say. We only know that the Holy Spirit led him and the church to this point. That is all God wants us to know. And as God leads us individually and as a church, we will see where Pope Francis takes us. So I will conclude by recalling Cardinal Bergoglio's words from a few years ago. I find hope in those. I don't want to mislead anyone. The truth is, I am a sinner who God, in his mercy, has chosen to love in a privileged manner. I had to learn from my errors along the way, because to tell the truth, I made hundreds of errors and sins. It would be wrong for me to say that these days I ask forgiveness for the sins and offenses that I might have committed. Today I ask forgiveness for the sins and offenses that I did indeed commit. Challenge, struggle, pain. Priest, provincial, archbishop, and now pope. There is no doubt for me that God has led this man. Grace shows forth in his life and is a gift to all of us. May God continue to bless us as Pope Francis leads us to see new opportunity, our grace, and our knots. Thank you.
You know, so many people bypassed those words of the Pope, I am a sinner, and glossed over them. Well, not really, but it's nice that you said that. But I think that one of the things that Father Niehoff did was accent that real sin took place and was acknowledged and forgiven. And we have a pope who is not only a sinner, but a forgiven sinner. And there is a huge difference between those two things, because the second, to be a forgiven sinner, is to act in total freedom. So I thank you so much for that. Those were really important insights about grace in his life, the Pope's life, and also in our own life. So I thank you for that. You all will have a chance to discuss this with Father Niehoff. I invite you now simply to take a stretch break and for Father O'Malley to come down here and be welcomed by us. And we'll start again in 5 minutes.